I wanted to ask you, Jenny, because screens are really addictive. And so, but it's this balance, right? Because it's our kids now, like I have a 16-year-old or almost 16-year-old, 11-year-old, and a 4-year-old. And the screens are everywhere. And people are telling me, well, they need to be involved in the screens to a certain extent because that's their generation. That's where the jobs are going to be. So at some age, you're going to have to expose them to screens. And it's like as soon as we did expose our children to the screens, even though it was, for instance, for learning programs, like not Jill, just sit on a video game, like, something that we thought was a good intention, immediately it's addictive. And I think all the adults listening to this can understand because how many of us are addicted to our phones or, the pinging of when you get a new email or a text, oh, who is it? Like releases that dopamine hit. So it is an addictive device. So how do you manage that? Like, you said you have a 17-year-old now. Are they not on screens at all ever? Or are you able to somehow find this balance?
That's a really interesting question. So to the point that screens are everywhere, I would say it's not totally true because they're not in Joel's house. So they're not everywhere, right?
You have a screen. No.
Joel, the computer. He's got the computer. I get it.
And he watches TV on that.
Yeah, totally.
News and stuff.
Yeah. But you can make the choice to not have screens in your home in terms of television. You can absolutely do that. And a lot of people do that. Here's what we found. Our 17-year-old does have a phone and he plays sports and he's got friends. He's up lifeguarding at a camp right now. He doesn't actually have a phone this week. It's a wonderful camp where there's no phones allowed. And I think those are fantastic. But he's up there lifeguarding. He does have a phone and we do have some video games in our house and we do have a TV. And so what I have found is that because our kids are wired for real life, we spent so much time and we still do. Our kids are, required is the wrong word, but our family culture is that we're outside for 1,000 hours every year. That's our family culture. And so what that does is it pushes out time for screens. There's just not that much time for it. We 1,000% limit it. But they have been wired for real life and for real relationships. And so it's not as big of a draw. Now, I will say that this man, Dr. Nicholas Kardaras, who wrote a phenomenal book called Glow Kids and one called Digital Madness, he says that about 10% of the population are prone to screen addiction. Now, screen addiction is gambling. Sports gambling is a huge problem. It's pornography, it's social media, it's gaming, and it's the internet. So there's a lot of ways that you can become addicted to technology. That's what he works with. He was an addiction specialist for drugs and alcohol. And now all he does is work with, especially it's like the teen to early 20s failure to launch screen addicted kids. So he says, even with protective factors, there is still a propensity for 10% of the population, and you just don't know. You don't know if that's going to be your kid or not your kid. So I think it's a huge deal. It must be limited. These algorithms are so powerful. I read a book by Erin Lochner. It's called The Opt-Out Family. It's a fantastic book. And she was talking about how when Instagram, so they changed their algorithm. Instagram was a place to see the photos of your friends and the people you cared about. And you'd scroll through and you'd see what your friends are doing. And they were making something like $1.8 billion a year. Well, then they changed the algorithm. The algorithm is now what you might want to see. And it's a way to draw you in, to be more sticky, so that it's like the people that you don't know. And now you're sucked into watching, a video of someone brushing their arm hair or whatever. So you get sucked in. When they change the algorithm, and the numbers are not exact, but it'll give you a good picture. It went from something like $1.8 billion in profit a year to $48 billion in profit a year. That's how powerful these algorithms are. And so I think that what we have to do, when you brought up those numbers of 4 to 7 hours, 4 to 7 minutes, at the very least, there has to be a balance there. We cannot have kids that are on screens dealing with someone else's imagination, becoming dysregulated, because actually interactive screens, Dr. Victoria Dunkley talks about this, interactive screens are worse. You would think that interactive screens would be better because we're interacting. I'm working on Minecraft. I'm building on this, and it's interactive. And she says, no, that dysregulates your entire nervous system. Also, the screens are so close to your face. The screens are different than they were. When I was a little kid, we had a TV in the living room, and my grandpa would come over every day, and he would, if we were watching it after school, he'd grab my arm and he'd drag me back, and he'd be like, "You're too close." Yeah. And now we
Yeah.
got the ones, and it's right in front of their face. This is not good for their eyes. It's not good for so many things, but the screens have changed. So I absolutely think that parents have to limit. There's a lot of good options. There's a Gab phone. You don't have to have the internet in your pocket. And your kids will thank you later on. That's what parenting is all about. My midwife has always said, someday our kids are going to look back and ask us why. Why didn't you limit that? That was the only childhood I got. And you let me be on a screen for 4 to 7 hours a day. They're not going to be happy about it.
Mm.
Wow. Although it
Well,
doesn't feel that way as a parent in the moment, right?
And that's
When
what
your
that's
kids,
what parenting is. I mean,
yeah.
parenting has always been that. That hasn't changed. Parenting has always been a period of time where you're not super popular and what you're teaching your child. I mean, it's interesting when you think about all the things and lessons that kids get from their childhood. You're teaching them to be grateful. Maybe not grateful is the wrong word. You're teaching them to manage with what they have. So I think about, when I was a kid, I wanted to have more name brand clothes. Well, we didn't have that. And so what does that teach you? It teaches you how to cope with the lack in your life. Everyone has some lack in their life, and you have to learn how to manage that. And so as a child, you have to learn how to manage being a little bit different, going against the grain. And the tides are changing a little bit anyways, that's for sure. There's definitely going to be other parents out there that are reading sort of what's coming in the future and changing things for their kids, not allowing them to spend so much time in someone else's imagination. That's what a video game is. That's what a TV show is.
right.
You're inside of what someone else is creating. But Victoria Dunkley says, better to have just a family movie night. Do that. That's not going to dysregulate. If you need a little bit of a break, you're exhausted, don't hand them an iPad. Say, look, we're going to watch The Sound of Music or whatever, a little bit of a slower old movie. Do that together. And you can still have that downtime and snuggle and all of that. But not all screen time is the same.
So why is it that those interactive games are more dysregulating than like watching a family movie? Like if you talk about, like you're tapping into somebody else's creativity and their imagination when they're interacting. I know a lot of it's set up for them, but let's take Minecraft, for example, and they can build things and like now they can mod, they can do coding, where they can build their own mods. So why is that more dysregulating than watching like Sound of Music?
Okay, I'm going to read it. Interactive screen time causes more dysfunction than passive. Because it contributes to hyperarousal. Interactive screen
Oh,
time has much more potent detrimental effect on attention and executive functioning than passive screen time because the interactivity promotes higher levels of arousal and because the proximity of the screen causes more severe melatonin suppression and circadian disruption. She says no interactive screen devices at all until age 12 and after that only sparingly. And I think, if you're a parent that's done those things, you can see that it's hard to pull them out of it. They're just like really sucked in because it's interactive.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Wow. So what would you say? Let's
Be-
say there's
because
a,
yeah, I'm sorry, because the inherent interactivity is giving you immediate feedback, and that incentivizes. As Jenny, as you were talking about going through your soliloquy there, I was I couldn't help but you know but think well Cena's question was, how do you limit that? And you were talking about, well, sometimes you just have to be a tough parent. And I'm thinking there needs to be a way to incentivize something that's not screen. In other words, you can't be, oh, look at your score on Angry Birds. It's fantastic. You can't be fawning over gamesmanship. You have to create a family culture where the things that get praised, the things that are incentivized to praise and encourage, are other things. How well you fed the chickens, how you built a piece of pottery, you know, how you're doing in your business, mowing lawns or whatever. But you're incentivizing something else. Just like I always say around here, if your pond and woods can't compete with a screen, you're not being creative enough.
Yes. I mean, it's a really big deal. And I think one of the things that's changed is that parenting, we weren't really involved with the kids playing outside. You didn't have to deal with kids coming to you and saying, I'm bored. They probably did get bored, but they were out in the neighborhood with their friends. And so one of the societal things that has changed quite dramatically is that kids are no longer outside in the neighborhood. Play used to be a fairly hands-off experience. I have a book called Until the Streetlights Come On. It's a nostalgic phrase. People will say, I just had to come home when it got dark. When the streetlight came on, I knew that was my time to come home. I'd come home for dinner. But during the day, my parent didn't know where I was. And I have been jealous of that. I have thought, gosh, if I only could have been a parent in the 80s, I could have locked my kid outside all summer. And that's what everybody else was doing. And I don't know what the moms were doing inside. I could have had a cleaner house. I could have had better meals. I don't know. I could have taken a nap.
Yeah.
But there is investment here that's different than used to exist. You have to often make the plans. You often have to go with the child. You often have to find the friends and go get them and bring them over. And people are saying things like, look, I just want to put on my pajamas. It's Friday night, but instead I'm going to go get these 5 kids. I'm going to run a cake baking class in my kitchen. I'm going to have these activities. We're going to have a bonfire. The parents are more involved now because they have to be. But what I have found is that it also enhances your own life. It becomes a gift. It is a gift for me that since 2011, I have spent 1,000 hours outside every single year since 2011. As an adult, as a grown woman, I would have never done that. I would have never, what a gift that is. And there's this man, Kim John Payne. He's one of my favorite authors. He wrote a book called Simplicity Parenting. And he says that when we rescue childhood, and that's really what we're talking about here, right? We're rescuing childhood. The dysregulated, I want to read a little bit more. Interactive screen time shifts the nervous system into fight or flight mode, which leads to dysregulation and disorganization of various biological systems. Playing video games mimics the kinds of sensory assaults humans are programmed to associate with danger. Any electronic screen interaction, regardless of the content, regardless if it's learning content or not, can irritate the nervous system. And so this is from Dr. Victoria Dunkley. The book is called Reset Your Child's Brain. It's a fantastic book. But what we're doing is we're rescuing our kids from this onslaught of technology. And Kim John Payne says that when we rescue our kids' childhoods, that we day by day, inevitably, remarkably, rescue ourselves in return. And that's what I found. It's such a win-win to prioritize hands-on living. It's not just for the kids. You have a better life too as a parent. And it may seem annoying. It may seem like such a pain that we have to limit these things and the kids are bugging for the screens. And why am I a parent now? If I were just a parent 30 years ago, I wouldn't have to deal with all of this stuff. But by learning how to navigate that in a way that allows our kids to be happy, energetic, and living fully, it bleeds into our life too.
Jenny, if I may, Cena and I see Cena jump, but I want to get this. You really triggered something, and I had never thought of it before. But give me a feedback on this. That I would put out a challenge to parents out there, to develop hobbies. You come home from work and you sit down in front of the TV for 3 hours in the evening. Well, what does that tell your kids? But if you go to if you have a little woodworking shop in your garage, or you're quilting, or you're knitting, or you're whatever, a hobby, kids. I know in our own family, both of our kids, every time Teresa did a craft, I built something, the kids were right under our feet. They're wanting to pound the nails. We're wanting to hold the board, run the saw, run the knitting needles, churn the applesauce, grinder. Kids want to be up in your face. And so if my challenge to the adults would be, we need to challenge ourselves with having a more interesting life. Friends, want to dive deeper into our thought-provoking conversations? Become part of the Beyond Labels family today by joining below. For any gift amount, you'll get access to the full, uncut episodes.
Every contribution, whether big or small, keeps this podcast going.
So join us and expand your Beyond Labels experience. Thank you.